All right, continuing our discussion of statements and connectives that we began in the previous section, this next section introduces what's called a compound statement. So if you remember the last section, everything we talked about was called a simple statement. A simple statement expresses one idea at a time. And so what a compound statement does, a compound statement joins two or more simple statements together with connectives. Now, you naturally do this when you speak. Okay? I don't think any of this is going to be earth-shattering. The big thing we're doing is we're just going to apply some symbolism to this so that we can do our logic, and when we get to the point, we can show if an argument is valid or invalid. And so what we're just going to practice is using our connectives for the next little while. So here are three simple statements. The house is for sale. We can afford the house. The house has a garage. You're probably going to get tired of those statements by the time we're done, and I'll change them a little later. Now, I want you to notice this. From here on out, what I said in the previous section is true. Simple statements, when I define them symbolically, we always define our simple statements positive. If you have to express a not, you use your squiggly like we talked about before, and we're going to see that. Okay, so here goes. The first of our simple statements is called the conjunction. A conjunction is symbolized by this thing right here. It's called a caret. I don't care if you remember that or not. It looks like a triangle without the bottom. Okay, so the conjunction is symbolized that it's like the plus symbol or the minus symbol. It's the symbol that now in your mind is going to be related to this. And when you read this, you read it as the word and. Also, sometimes the word but is used, and it also is part of the conjunction. Okay, so what I'm going to do, my first example, and then you're going to have two follow-up exercises. Again, I'm hoping that these aren't earth-shattering things, but if you got any questions, be sure to raise your hand, get them out in the open. Let's talk about them. I'm just going to take this. I'm going to write P caret Q as a statement. P caret Q. Okay, let's do it. So the statement P is the house is for sale. The caret means and. Statement Q is we can afford the house. That's good news. So P caret Q, P and Q is the house is for sale and we can afford the house. If you got a question, ask it. If you're feeling all right with that first one, then go ahead and do exercise 1. Write R caret Q as a statement. Okay, I'm just going to write this down. If you've got something different than me, then let's talk about that. Let's just clear up any misconceptions here right away. So, because this is basically what we're going to be doing for the rest of this section is we're going to be going through our new connectives and just writing symbolically, and then vice versa. I'll give you something written in words, and you're going to write it symbolically. We're going to do those two things. So, statement R is the house has a garage. The caret means and then Q is we can afford the house. Not seeing any hands. If you got anything, let me know. Otherwise, do exercise 2. Now, I've thrown in a negation here, okay, just to bring back the concept we were talking about in the previous section. So exercise 2, write P caret squiggly Q as a statement. Okay, so again, I'm going to go through this. If you got something different, then by all means, let's talk about it. The statement P is the house is for sale. That has not changed. Again, we've got a caret. The caret means and. This time, though, instead of Q, I've got squiggly Q. And so that means that instead of writing down we can afford the house, we're going to write down what? We cannot. Great. All right, that is what's called the conjunction. It is an and statement. Yes. Yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine. Yep. In case you didn't hear the question, it was he used but here instead of and but is another way to symbolize or to express the conjunction. Totally fine thing to do. Okay, next of our connectives after the conjunction is what's called the disjunction. The disjunction symbolized by a V, and it is read as or. It's an or statement. All right, so I'm going to do exercise 3. I'm going to nail that down, and then you're going to do exercise 4. I'm going to, or actually, it's exercise 3. Why don't you do that one? Because you don't need me to write anything down for you. Write P and then VQ. Write that as a statement. All right, so the statement P is the house is for sale. We've seen that several times. We're going to see it several more times. Sorry about the repetitive nature. But this time I have got the disjunction right there. So I'm going to say, or we can afford the house. I do the next one. Squiggly Q, disjunction R. All right, we saw this earlier, the squiggly Q. Statement Q is we can afford the house. And so then we wrote down squiggly Q is we cannot afford the house. Then the disjunction is going to be or, and then the statement R is the house has a garage. Now, the next one's my example because I want to talk about this specific situation where we have parentheses and we have a negation out in front of parentheses and how we deal with that situation. So anytime you see this, anytime you see a negation in front of parentheses, here's how you start this out. Okay, you're going to start it out with the words, it is false that. Or sometimes you'll see it is not true that. Doesn't matter. Means the same thing. Okay, I'll say it is false that. And then that it is false that covers the negation and the parentheses. You're good. Now you're just going to write what's in the parentheses as a statement. So it is false that P, the house is for sale. I got a disjunction right there. So it's going to be or, and then Q is we can afford the house. So just so that you get to go through the experience of writing one of those down, go ahead and do exercise 5. We got a squiggly out in front, so you're going to do that same sort of thing. Get that out of the way. Then finish the problem. Okay, once again, the second you see that squiggly in front of some parentheses, don't worry about anything else. Just write it is false that, or it is not true that. So it is false that, and now I'm just going to write down now what's in the parentheses. So it starts off with squiggly R, the house does not have a garage. Or the house has no garage, if that's what you prefer. And then this is a conjunction, so and P, the house is for sale. Are we doing all right, except for we're probably tired of the house? Okay, well, let's flip the page. So we've talked about the first one, a conjunction, that's an and statement. The second one's a disjunction, that is an or statement. The third of our connectives is called a conditional statement. Okay, the conditional statement is symbolized by an arrow, and it is read as if and then. So there are two parts to this statement. So for instance, I'm going to do this first one. This is my example. The first one says I've got P arrow Q. Okay, P arrow Q. So here's how you write it. Whenever you see that arrow, you're going to, oh, it's a conditional statement. I'm going to start with the word if. Okay, if. If the statement P, if the house is for sale, now before I write down the statement Q, before that, I'm now going to write the word then. And then the statement Q is we can afford the house. I think one of the best things, like if you're not interested in logic and computers and going into law, I think one of the best applications for students of this unit is using a conditional statement correctly. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about conditional statements in a later section, and what conditional statement is and is not equivalent to. That way, you know that you're speaking things truthfully. And so, let me just tell you a little bit more about this. So this says if the house is for sale, whatever comes after the word if, this is what's called the condition. It's the part that has to be satisfied. If the house is for sale. So the condition is the house has to be for sale. Then, well, what comes after the then is it's called the consequence. That is what's going to happen if the house is for sale. And like I said, we're going to talk a lot more about conditional statements because they're interesting and they're useful and they're often misused when we speak. So we'll talk about that. So in the meantime, exercise 6, I just want you to write that conditional statement in words for me, please. Okay, so once again, I see that arrow. The moment I see that arrow, I say, okay, cool, this is a conditional statement. Conditional statement starts with the word if. So then it's if P, so the house is for sale again. Then, and this time the then is squiggly R. So R is the house has a garage. And so squiggly R is then the house does not have a garage or has no garage. Now, all of the compound statements that we have been working with and dealing with up to this point have just involved 2 statements. But compound statements can have more statements. And so what we're going to do is, okay, if you've got a lot of statements, you're going to have to identify which ones go together. And so linguistically in our grammar, the way we do this in a compound statement, commas indicate grouping. Now there is an order of operations for our connectives, but I'm not going into that because I think that's a little too much to have to be responsible for in this. So we're just going to talk about grouping as far as parentheses and how that equates to commas. So for instance, here's my example. I've got in parentheses, I've got P and Q. Outside the parentheses, I've got R. Okay, so here's what I do. I say, okay, looking at this statement, oh, this is a conditional statement. I've got an arrow right there. So what this says is I've grouped together these 2 things over here. These are the conditions. Okay, they are grouped and they are on the left side of the arrow. And then the R is the consequence. So we're going to start off with the word if. And so here we go. If the house is for sale, and Q, we can afford the house, Then I'm going to stop. I'm going to let you catch up with me. So if the house is for sale and we can afford the house, and I'm pausing so that you can get up to the same point as me, because now I'm going to show you, and it's not super hard, but how do I represent the fact that those two statements are grouped in parentheses? They go together. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, comma. So anytime you see a comma, if there is more than one statement on that side of the comma, you put parentheses around it. And you're going to see that on the last page. On the last page, we're going to take statements that are already written out in words, and we are going to write them symbolically. And so when you have a bunch of statements, look for the comma. Okay. Now, in grammar, a plain old if-then statement, I don't do it because I try not to be confusing, but it is technically grammatically correct to say if the house is for sale, comma, then we can afford the house. Okay. When there's just one statement on each side of the comma, you don't need a parenthesis. Okay. It's only when there's two or more statements on the side of a comma that you use a parenthesis to group them. But I didn't mention it because I don't want to. I just want you to get used to using the if and then statement. Okay, so there's my if the house is for sale and we can afford the house, comma. That means these two statements go together. Okay, perfect. And now the other side of the arrow then are the house has a garage. Now, same thing for you. Exercise 7, I would like you to take that statement. I'd like you to write it in words, and I'd like you to put a comma in the appropriate place that indicates that the Q or P go together. Remember, if you make a mistake, it is okay. It is a chance to learn. So in case you didn't hear, the question is, where did this and come from? The and came from that symbol right there. That's my and. Okay. The comma just means these two statements were in parentheses. They were grouped together. Okay. And grouping means start here, do this first, just like in arithmetic. All right, so let's see how you did. Okay, so really the big thing here, everything we've already talked about, except the new thing here is where do I put this comma to indicate that the Q or P on the right-hand side that they go together. So let's just go. First, I've got squiggly R. So the house does not have a garage again. That's the only statement on the left, right? Or correct? So to indicate that the next statements go together, I am now going to put a comma right there. That comma, if I look on the left, there's only one statement. Okay, that's the squiggly R. And now I'm going to have two statements over here on the right, and that would indicate to my brain now when I see that comma that these two statements over on the right are grouped together. Okay, they go together. So the house does not have a garage, comma, and Q, we can afford the house. This is the symbol for the disjunction. So or P, the house is for sale. If you didn't quite get where that comma went, don't worry. There's going to be another problem involving parentheses in just a couple moments. You're going to get another opportunity to do it. Yo, what's up? Well, when we do, that's a great question. So the question was, why didn't we just start writing the statement with the parentheses? Uh, the answer to that is because sometimes the order matters. So like, for instance, in a conditional statement, if the parentheses were over here on the right, you can't just flip flop the condition and the consequence. That would lead to something completely different. Um, so, uh, so that's why we don't flip flop the parentheses and right there. Now, what you're speaking to though, is when we come back next time, we are actually we are gonna work with the truth values, trues and falses. And so the parentheses will tell me that when I'm actually doing the operations, I am going to start here with the parentheses. Okay. But as far as writing it down, we don't. We just stick with the order that things are given. Okay. Great question. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Remember, mistakes are opportunities to learn. So nothing wrong with that. I think that was a fantastic question. The last of our connectives. So we've got the conjunction, that's and statements, disjunction, or statements, conditional, if then statements. The last one is called the by conditional. The by conditional is symbolized by a double arrow. The prefix by means two. So what it means is you have two conditional statements for one. You can read either direction, it's a conditional statement. And the way you write this down grammatically, when you have the by conditional, it's read as if and only if. Now, that's more words than I want to write. I'm already writing more than I like to. So math people are fundamentally lazy. Okay, that's what you got to know. That's why we have symbols for everything. And so the way we write if and only if is we write if. Okay, and if with two F's. If and only if. Yes, you math people are so cool. All right, so here's what I would like you to do. Q biconditional squiggly R. Just to give you a little hint, you're going to write down the statement Q. You're going to write down if and only if, or if. And then you're going to write down squiggly R. That is your biconditional statement right there. Okay, so Q is we can afford the house. The biconditional, I'm going to write it all out this first time since it's the first one we're doing. We can afford the house if and only if. Squiggly R, the house does not have a garage. I know the biconditional, that's sometimes one that's a little harder to grasp. All the biconditional is, again, math people are lazy, is instead of writing down these two statements, these two if-then statements. So going to the left, if we can afford the house, then the house does not have a garage. That's going this way. And then going the reverse way, if the house does not have a garage, then we can afford the house. The biconditional is just instead of writing out those two long if-then statements, we condense it into one statement and say if and only if. It means you've got a conditional going both ways. All right, so one more. Exercise 8, just throwing in this opportunity to use parentheses and a comma. This is our last one where you're going to be writing it all out. It's also the last one with the house. So you can rejoice that you don't have to deal with this house and the garage and whether we can afford it or not. All right, so I'm going to get started on this. Check your work with mine. So I got my parentheses. I've got squiggly P, so the house is not for sale. I've got my biconditional, if and only if. I'm going to just write I with two F's since it's going to be a longer statement. And then Q, we can afford the house. Now, those two things are grouped together. They're in parentheses. So before I move on, I'm now going to indicate to anybody reading this that those two things go together. So I'm going to put a comma right there. Okay, commas are for grouping. And then this is a conjunction. So it's going to be and or the word but, whatever one you want. And then squiggly R is the house does not have a garage. So the house does not have a garage. I know writing out all those statements, that's tedious. It's a little bit boring, but it is really good for you because doing that, being able to take symbolic statements and write them out, also being able to take written out statements and write them symbolically, which we're going to do right now. These are all part of the bigger problems that we're working up toward. What our eventual goal is to be able to see an argument and be able to determine, is this a valid argument? Is it good reasoning? Or is this an invalid argument? Is that bad reasoning? That is one of the big uses of logic for us as we go through this. Okay, so being able to convert back and forth and know what these connectives are symbolizing, that's going to be important. So flipping to the last page, thankfully, at long last, I've changed P, Q, and R. Again, and notice P, Q, and R are all defined in the positive. Okay, we always do that. And what we're going to do, or what you're going to do, and then I will double check you, is we are going to write each of these statements and words, we're going to write them in symbols. So the first statement, exercise 9, I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to do this. This says the water is 70 degrees and we do not go swimming. So write that out, please, in symbols. All right, so this says the water is 70 degrees. What is that symbolically? P? I've got the word and right there. So and is going to be the caret. And then we do not go swimming. So we do not go swimming is squiggly R. Perfect. All right, do exercise 10. If the sun is not shining, then the water is not 70 degrees. Okay, so this one starts with the word if. So when it starts with the word if, what kind of statement does that mean it is? A conditional, so I need an arrow. If means arrow. So now, the sun is not shining. Then, so the sun is not shining. This is the condition. So the sun is shining as Q, so that's squiggly Q. Then, so now I'm moving to the other side of the arrow. The water is not 70 degrees. So P is the water is 70 degrees. So that's squiggly P. Exercise 11. If the water is 70 degrees, note the comma. Then the sun is not shining and we go swimming. Again, it starts with the word if. So since it starts with the word if, again, it's a conditional statement. So I'm going to put my arrow right there. So we've got if the water is 70 degrees, and then a comma. So how many statements are on that side of the comma right there? Just one. Okay, so that means there's just one thing for the conditional. The water is 70 degrees. That is P, all by itself on the left. Now I've got a comma. Then, how many statements are on the right side of the then? There's two, so I'm going to use a parenthesis right here. And so the sun is not shining, so that's squiggly Q, and that's a caret. We go swimming. R. Those two statements are in parentheses because they're on the same side of the comma. Seem reasonable? All right, we just got two more. You're doing great. I appreciate your endurance today. Exercise 12. All right, so reading this, it says we go swimming or the sun is shining. Then there's a comma right there. Okay, so how many statements are to the left of the comma? Two. Yes, I'm going to use some parentheses. We go swimming is are, or that is the disjunction. The sun is shining, that's Q. Those two things go together because they are on the same side of the comma. Then I have if and only if, that's my by conditional, so a double arrow. The water is 70 degrees, so that's P. All right, one more. Last problem of the day. All right, this statement starts with the words, it is false that. So from the previous page, when you see the words, it is false that, what is that meaning? We're going to do a squiggle, and then it means whatever comes after that is in parentheses. Okay, that was from the bottom of the front page of this section. It is false that, or it is not true that, is a indicator that everything that comes after is grouped and has the opposite truth value. Okay, so it is false that. Squiggly, a negation, and then parentheses. And now what comes after is in parentheses. If the sun is shining, so it's an if statement. So I've got a conditional. If the sun is shining, that's Q. Then we do not go swimming. So that's squiggly R. There we go.